Hi all, this is going to be one of the workshop videos I told you about. It's not going to be the one about the stuff with the law enforcement officer. Unfortunately, they are working a new case this week, and so they couldn't vet the script I provided because it's not my own expertise, it's somebody else's. I'm relaying. I need to vet that stuff. I didn't want to just spitball it without getting an okay from the experts. So, occupational hazard with this sort of thing, but I do have a different type of segment that did come from your feedback. One of the big things that people said was to bring back dialogue options, which I found really interesting. Dialogue options is one of those segments that didn't set the world on fire in terms of traffic, but did have this sort of devoted core of people who really liked it. So, there's benefits to that. And I'll start thinking about another 5-6 interview season of dialogue options to put together. I know Professor Ferguson is one a lot of people have asked me to interview. If you have an idea for someone, let me know. It would be really helpful if you also had a way of contacting that person. That would be even better because sometimes it's really hard to facilitate communication. Sometimes the difference between, I'm going to move this because it feels weird. Sometimes the difference between an interview happening and not happening and is just the ability to coordinate it. So that's I've had quite a few close ones in terms of they'd really like to do it but they're too busy and stuff like that. So sorry, the other thing I should say today is I have a sore throat right now. It's probably allergies because the world is melting right now around here. We had an ice storm and now it's all going bye-bye and so all the mold and stuff is creeping in, but my voice is shot. So if I do take pauses, if I do seem to be swallowing with effort, that's why. But I do want to workshop, and by workshop, I mean, this is really rough. If the concept works, I'll re-record it with better production values, with slightly more visual interestingness in the background. I think that kind of helps indicate the different things. Maybe not. This is something you guys can let me know. Do production values matter that much, or are you really more interested in the information? The other thing that has come from the feedback is people would like podcast versions of my stuff, and I will probably be going with Podbean for that unless people have other ideas. If you have a suggestion that's better, I don't know from podcast services. I know nothing about this. Podbean is the one I'm aware of. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, whether it's the ones I feel most strongly about, if it's the most popular videos. How do you think we should work this? I know I'm asking a lot of questions. I know everybody won't answer all the questions, but the more feedback I can get from this, the better. But this segment I want to try out today, the basics of, is something the working title is Core Rules for Communication. One of the things that people said they really enjoyed was my things about sort of self-improvement type stuff. And this is interesting to me because I am doing some side work with somebody who actually has their master's degree in arts therapy. And so, I'm working with them, and one of the things is communicating with marginalized groups. Now, you guys know, I believe gamers are a marginalized group. I toss aside the fact that gamers are white and male and look at the actual indicators of marginalization, and they're there. So, I see gamers as a subgroup of white males that do show signs of marginalization, and communication is extremely important when you're dealing with marginalized communities. And I've come up with an easy way to remember how to communicate effectively, I have called it the FUSS method of criticism, as in don't make a fuss. FUSS stands for fairness, understanding, specificity, and self-awareness. The fairness pillar is, believe it or not, something a lot of people miss. A lot of people think they're being fair, but they're actually not, because fairness involves to both the scope of the criticism and the intensity of the criticism. Does the person deserve how hard you're coming at them, or what scab you're picking? And this is, of course, in terms of whether somebody's going to listen to you or whether somebody's just going to be hurt and be silenced instead of actually understanding where you're coming from. Silencing is a big point of contention in gaming, which communicates to me that people not only don't want to be silenced, they don't want to be unintentionally silencing other people. When people feel like they're being treated unfairly, especially people with porous personal boundaries, and especially people who have been bullied in the past, leading to porous personal boundaries, because what bullying does is forces you to do things that you don't want to do, but you feel like you have no choice. That erodes those boundaries that leave you feeling safe from being taken advantage of. And I see a lot of very porous personal boundaries in gaming, which is why there is so much suspicion and cynicism out there. So the thing about fairness is it's about critiquing an idea or an action, not making a personal attack. It's the difference between saying, I disagree with this part of your argument, and to be dramatic, you're an idiot, or you're stupid, or that's idiotic. That's too far. That you cannot judge a person's entire intellect based on a single YouTube video or a tweet. You just can't. Some people could be very smart, but they don't communicate well in a specific medium. Part of the reason I took up Twitter is it forces me to make my ideas faster, in fewer words. And that is something that when I started writing comic books, I realized, oh man, this is a skill that needs to be practiced, because I don't want to read like Chris Claremont. Some people are just better long form. Some people can get ideas out succinctly. Certain ideas work well enough short. Others need more time. And so if you're being fair, you take these things into consideration. You are aware of not only the scope and intensity, but also the timing and frequency of your criticisms. Are you kicking someone when they're down? They're probably not going to listen to you if you do. Are you always criticizing? This is an interesting point, because I think we can all agree in theory that there's a time and a place for criticism, and people should be open to valid criticism. That time and place are subjective. And the question, if you want your criticisms heard, if you want your criticisms validated, time, place, scope, and intensity all matter. And this is something the games press messes up a lot. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees that some idiots carry on in ways, and these are people who actually are quite stupid, they carry on in ways that aren't right. They dehumanize people. And I think we can all agree on that. But when, a Lee Alexander column drops and she's calling all gamers misogynist neckbeards, she's tying that to the gamer identity, that's not a fair criticism. That's just not fair. And people got upset. When a reviewer is being seen to be unfair to a game, gamers get upset, because fairness is important. And, one of the pillars of fairness is, unless you're in a beauty pageant, appearance-based attacks have no place. You make an appearance-based attack on someone, you weaken your argument. You make it less likely that a self-assured person with healthy boundaries is going to listen to you, because the way someone looks is not relevant. People shouldn't have to look like models to have an opinion. I think that's a big problem in modern discourse right now, that we take too many of our collective ideas from celebrities, and instead of people who have actually, lived it. So that's the fairness pillar. The understanding pillar, the U, is two-pronged. One is about understanding the point, the general point a person is trying to make. That's very important to being heard. That's very important to having your criticism accepted as valid, showing that you actually understand what a person is trying to say. The other part is understanding and empathizing with the person, understanding that something could be very personal for them, could be deeply painful for them, and judging and criticizing them in that context. This is important because people want to listen to people they think get them and support them. You don't want to listen to somebody who doesn't have your best interests in mind, because they're going to lead you down the wrong path. They're trying to mess you up, right? So, it's important to display some understanding of what the person was trying to say. This is a mistake people make with my work a lot. They put words in my mouth. They say I was saying something. I actually said the opposite right in the piece. You're guaranteed to not be listened to if you don't seem to have a clue what you're talking about. I mean, isn't that the big criticism that a lot of gamers have about feminist criticism of games? They don't seem to understand video games. They don't seem to understand video games as games. That is a very fair reason to dismiss a criticism. They don't know what they're talking about. It's amazing how many people in the process of criticizing show that they actually shouldn't be listened to, because they're never going to be persuaded. They're never going to be convinced. You can never get them to buy in. And that's an empathy thing as well. Sometimes people just hate you and they're not going to like anything you do. Not worth listening to them. And that's where the empathy comes in. It matters a lot that you express that you see that someone's going through a bad time, and have that matter. Don't go, I see you're going through a bad time, and then criticize anyway and violate the fairness principle. It's very important that you be aware of whether or not a person is in a headspace to actually accept criticism at that point, because there are times that people need support, not criticism. And that's very human, and that's actually very healthy for someone to realize. On this point, again, don't nitpick. It really weakens your argument. If you focus on one sentence, and this happens a lot, and you look at this and go, this obviously means a lot to someone. They're obviously very passionate about it. They took it very personally, but this comment, this criticism, has nothing to do with the main point of the article, so I have no idea how to take it. And that's what nitpicking does. If you can pull a statement out of an article and the main point still holds, a good editor would have caught that line, but it's really not important. If you're losing the forest for the trees that way, you're not going to be heard. The last thing about understanding that I'm going to touch on here as a broad principle is that you should be prepared to back up your criticism. Criticism should be seen as the beginning of a dialogue. So if a person responds to you, you better be prepared to defend your position. Because if you can't, if you won't engage in a back and forth that doesn't involve, name calling and stuff that's not relevant, back to fairness again, your criticism's not going to be taken seriously. You have to show enough understanding of what you're saying to defend your viewpoint. You should never expect someone to just roll over. You should always expect someone you respect as a thinker to defend their views, Because if someone's not prepared to defend their statements, maybe they shouldn't have been saying them publicly. So don't get offended by pushback. Be prepared to defend what you have said, because the person is not required to listen to you. You're trying to persuade by openly criticizing someone. Now, that brings us to the S, specificity. Wow, does this one get missed a lot? A surprising amount. And out of all of these, this one probably bugs me personally the most. You guys know, if you've watched my channel long enough, my 2 pet peeve comments is, I disagree with you a lot, but I think you're cool. And I don't agree with everything you said, but yeah. I want to know what those disagreements are. And it frustrates me that someone found it important enough to say that they disagree, but not provide details. Because specificity is the only way a person is actually going to see the mistakes they made enough to correct them. You're wrong is not enough. That's nice. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. In order to be persuasive in your criticism, you have to point out the specifics of your disagreement. Always and never should not come into your vocabulary. You always do this. You never do this. Ironically, this is precisely the reason that I don't put a lot of stock in people who tell me, blanket, I can't handle criticism. It's not true. I know there are times I've taken criticism and used it to improve. So when you make a blanket statement like that, they are exceptionally easy to disprove. It is much easier and more constructive to focus on a single thing you disagree with instead of characterizing the entirety of a person's behavior one way or the other. I hope that makes sense. Don't hedge as well. This is something that I know some people have been taught to do, but they haven't been taught to do it in a context that seems genuine. When someone asks me, I have some criticisms about your last show. Do you want to hear them? The honest answer is no. No, I really don't want to hear criticisms about a show. Some people are going to like them. Some people aren't. If you are coming to me with something, I want to believe it's important enough for you to just say it. Don't ask for my permission, because nobody likes being criticized. Nobody wants it. And what you do when you do that, at least in the experiences I have, is you actually charge the conversation. You actually make it harder to hear, because now the person is in a defensive crouch. Now the person is bracing themselves for what you want to say next. If you actually think a person isn't in a position to hear it, go back to the understanding principle. Ask them if they're okay. Find out what their mental state is, and then decide for yourself whether they're a position to hear it or not. Because the thing I've found is most people then get very angry when they say, do you want to hear it? And I say no. They asked a question. Don't ask a question you're not prepared to hear multiple answers to. If you are saying it, if you are saying, I have some comments, do you want to hear them? And you're not prepared to hear no, you are starting the conversation off on a dishonest foot. It is disingenuous to ask a question when what you really want is permission to criticize. You shouldn't ask a person for that. It is on you, the critic, to present your criticisms in a fair and understanding way with specifics. And if asked, be prepared to provide additional details. And that's why it's okay to say, hey, are you busy? Hey, do you have a minute? Because that's fair for somebody to say, I got a meeting in 5 minutes. That's all you got. If you can't do it in 5 minutes, you probably can't. But a more appropriate approach is, instead of asking the person, do you want to hear it? Say to them, look, I have some things I want to talk to you about this last project. Can we talk about this now? If not, when's a good time? That's honest. That indicates there's something you need to get off your chest. You're owning that it's important to you, but you're being fair to the person by recognizing that this may not be the greatest moment. Honest criticism is very welcome. A lot of the time, critics seem like they have something personal or some unspoken alternative agenda that makes it harder to trust that the criticism's in your best interest. And specificity, specifics, especially in discussion, matter so much. If you're not prepared to really engage, don't offer the criticism in the first place. If it's not important enough to you to defend, I say again, and provide specifics, don't dig in the first place. Why? You're not going to be heard. And that's the final pillar that perhaps should have come first, but I think it's actually the last thing that people should consider, because you got to do the other ones before. You've got to figure out exactly what your criticism is before you engage in self-awareness and wonder, am I the right messenger for this criticism? The hilarious one of late, and some people get on me for mocking certain criticisms. I get that. I get why some people may identify with the person being mocked. Understand that it is a defense mechanism to things that bug me. And I would rather make a joke about it than get really angry about it. But just staying silent sometimes is not an option, because that means I am going to feel like my boundaries are being violated. There are times where people have to communicate that it is not acceptable to talk to them in a certain way. And the one recently completely lacking in self-awareness was a guy who criticized a joke I made about lesbian sex because of a sex act he engaged in with his girlfriend. Why is that lacking in self-awareness? How does a heterosexual guy know anything about lesbian sex? This should seem like common sense. But what I've found is common sense is neither. And that's why I'm saying, before, the last thing you do before you write that tweet, before you post that comment, are you the right messenger for this criticism? Or is there something that is going to seem uninformed or hypocritical? The guy, I know he's wrong in this case, because it was the, I'm not going to give the example, it's a tangent, but another example that I went through recently was a game industry professional criticizing me in a direct message about not being positive and cheerful enough. And the smile more stereotype aside, this particular person, I went, you gotta be kidding me. Because this particular person got drunk and angry sad at PAX one year and physically assaulted me. And I didn't say anything because I knew the guy was going through a bad time. I knew it was out of character. We worked it out. And so I don't feel the need to say anything. But after someone does that, you no longer have the right to tell someone to cheer up or be more positive. A lot of the time that just comes across as self-talk people are directing at others. And that never goes over well in terms of someone hearing your criticism. The other thing about self-awareness is emotion. Emotion versus a rational approach. I get into a lot of circling the bowl conversations, because there is clearly a lot of emotion coming out of a person that they are not in touch with. And when a person is not in touch with their feelings, you can't have a productive conversation with them. If someone is upset and is willing to admit that they are upset, are willing to, own that they are having an emotional reaction to something, you know what? Sometimes that's valid. And I don't think that should be immediately dismissed. But they have to be able to identify and name their feelings in order to have a productive conversation. And I find a lot of people have been trained to try to mask that they have any feelings whatsoever. That's unfortunate, because again, that's showing a personal boundaries issue. Personal boundaries can be too porous, but they can also be too rigid. And someone who is unable to admit that they're having an emotional reaction to something, when they're cursing and swearing and mischaracterizing and flinging personal attacks and all that stuff, they come across as not being in their right mind. And it's better to just sort of back away slowly. Now, the last bit of self-awareness, the last kind of point, is one that I think a lot of people, especially in the games press, neglect as well. Not every piece of content online or anywhere else is for you or me. This is the reason I'm kind of hesitant to criticize Grand Theft Auto. I am not the audience for Grand Theft Auto. I am not the player base for Grand Theft Auto. And I say both because watching games and playing games are two very different things. If something is not for me, I can't engage with it. I can't connect with it. I'm never going to buy it. I'm not going to play it much unless I have to for work. But when I'm reviewing games, and I try to avoid games I have a negative bias against from the beginning, like The Sims. The Sims is not for me. The Sims isn't for me. I can decorate my own houses. I can cook. I can, do this stuff. It's not for me. It's for people who want that kind of wish fulfillment. I still make fun of it because it's a good runner. But I am not going to do an in-depth criticism of The Sims. I am not going to do an in-depth criticism of Grand Theft Auto. I am not the market. I am not the audience. And I wish more game critics would, when they encounter a violent game, for instance, say, this is a wonderfully put together game. It's too violent for my tastes. So if you're squeamish like I am, don't play it. Otherwise, it's very well made. This will be better received than an ongoing criticism of the violence in a game, because there's no harm in violent games. It's just not to your taste. And overall, the discussion of games has to become much more self-aware and separate taste from morality. You don't have to like something just because there's nothing wrong with it. You don't have to find something funny. You don't have to find something cool. You're not going to connect to every product out there. It is perfectly fine to say, I don't like this. It may not be as fine to say this causes harm. Some things do cause harm. If someone is using a video game to avoid life, that can be harmful. That's avoidant behavior, and there's probably deeper issues that need to be explored. But just, that wasn't my favorite thing in the world. There are lots of games that I've played, and it was all right. I didn't care for them. I didn't like them. There are other games I actually think made mistakes. And it's important to be able to see the difference, because then your criticism, a developer can take your criticism and say, all right, if we want to broaden the appeal of our game, big if, most do because they want to sell more copies. But if we want to broaden the appeal of our game, we have to consider this. As opposed to, this person's telling me I'm doing something morally wrong. Well, That's not true. Dismissed, right? The idea of being more open, providing more modes, providing more choice for people who want different things in games is a very important thing for game developers to be open to, because that way lies innovation. You know, I think it's important for game developers to occasionally experiment outside their comfort zone. It would be really interesting if Rockstar made a non-violent game. I don't even know if they're capable of it, but that would be interesting to me. You know, look at Guerrilla Games, who went from Killzone to Horizon Zero Dawn. They, you know, stepped out of their comfort zone and made a masterpiece, a flawed masterpiece. But here is an example of, I don't want to fixate on my criticisms of Horizon Zero Dawn, because you know what? Overall, I really liked the game, and the things I didn't like about the game didn't wreck overall my enjoyment of the game. I would buy another one. I played the crap out of that game, and that's what's important. For me to spend a lot of time criticizing it would not actually be honest and meaningful criticism. It would be me trying to prove something to someone. And that's not self-aware. Right? Right. I don't have to prove anything to anyone about my knowledge of video games or my love of video games. At one point I did, because people didn't know me, but now I'm pretty secure in the fact that there's a body of work that shows that stuff. So I don't have to do that anymore. I find it very interesting that there are game critics that have been around longer than I am who still seem profoundly insecure. And insecurity is a great way to get your criticisms dismissed. People want to take criticism from people who seem to have their shit together for obvious reasons. So that is the fuss method of criticism. That is the first sort of working concept, proof of concept sort of thing of core rules for communication. Let me know what you think. Should more specific examples be included? Should things be done more bullet points, more individual slides per segment? What did you like? Did you find the general thing useful? Do you like the overall format? And how long do you think a video of this sort should be? Should this be a 5-minute thing? A 7-minute thing, a 15-minute thing, a half-hour thing? This is longer because there was a preamble and giving you guys the whole concept. Or should it be something where there's a 5-minute sampler and then there's a longer video if people want to learn more? Because this is skills development, that's something I'm willing to do, because this is the sort of stuff that is supported with your Patreon dollars. And this is Patreon supported much more than YouTube advertising supportive. You can't make money on YouTube directly anymore. You need an alternative source of funding. So this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm workshopping this. I figure if you guys like it, other people will like it. And your opinions mean the most to me because you're willing to put money down. So, you know, that's a bit of self-awareness on my part that, yeah, the people who put money down are the ones most invested in the content. It's the same reason why nobody should listen to somebody who's never going to buy their game, right? Fairness. All right, so let me know. I'm really looking forward to what you guys have to say, and try to use the fuss method in your criticism. You notice this isn't the sandwich method, because I've actually read articles that the sandwich method can actually put some people off. And it seems like a lot of people in gaming actually don't respond to the sandwich method. You know, good thing, criticism, good thing. So I decided not to use it. There's no point in putting something out there that people don't find useful. I think that understanding in these cases is actually more important than praise. That's why I went that way. Let me know. Thanks for watching, and thanks again for your Patreon support.